Thank you for joining us for today's live webcast, Ransomware, Encryption, and Data Privacy, Protecting Your Data in the Cloud. Before we launch what I'm sure will be a very informative webinar, I wanted to introduce our speakers for today. Our first speaker is Bill Tolson, Vice President of Global Compliance and e-Discovery for Archive360. Bill brings 25 plus years of experience advising corporations on information governance, has written numerous books on the subject, and is a frequent speaker at industry events. Our next speaker is James McCarthy, Chief Compliance Officer and General Counsel here at Archive360. Jim has been providing legal guidance for over 25 years, not only in private practice, but for local, county, and state government bodies as well. Jim's also an adjunct professor, helping to mold the minds of tomorrow's employees on the implications of cybersecurity and ethics. And just a quick note on Archive360. Archive360 is an intelligent information management and archiving platform that is trusted by organizations around the world to securely migrate their digital data to the cloud and securely manage it for today's regulatory, legal, privacy, and business intelligence obligations. So now that we're finished with our introductions, I'd like to turn things over to Bill, who will begin with today's agenda.
All right. Well, thank you, Sharon, and greetings, everyone. Quick run through the agenda. Basically, the topic today is ransomware, but also, you know, what the new versions of ransomware, which I'll get into here shortly, how they affect and are affected by the new privacy regulations like GDPR and CCPA. And, you know, we'll touch on an aspect of that, you know, some may not have thought of, but it is a growing liability. So we'll basically get into, you know, what ransomware is very quickly, and then some of the costs associated with it. And then, you know, as we talk about that, we'll start talking about the new two-stage ransomware, what that means for those privacy regulations, and also speak a little bit about, you know, the place for backups with ransomware. You know, some people will understand that and some people won't, but really backups in most cases are not really a defense anymore. And then we'll finish out by how to defend against this two-stage ransomware, at least partly, and again, I'll spend some time doing that. So, you know, what are the key challenges that, you know, companies are facing? You know, what are the risks with ransomware and these new types of ransomwares that add additional liability? You know, what are those challenges for companies? You know, security for on-premise types of infrastructure is different than cloud security types of things. And you know, one of my assumptions is the vast majority of companies either have a strategy to move to the cloud or have already or are in the process. So, you know, a lot of this, a lot of the discussion today will revolve around ransomware and ransomware, how it affects cloud, how do you protect against it, those kinds of things, and then what technologies exist to you know, partly combat, you know, ransomware. So very simple stuff here, just so we all level set. You know, what is a data breach? And we're going to talk about, you know, two things here. You know, data breach, and then separately, but also very much tied to, you know, an infestation caused by ransomware. So a data breach simply is, you know, is the unauthorized accessing of enterprise data. It can either be from an external actor or an employee. But you know, that's relatively simple. Boy, somebody got into your enterprise data and they weren't authorized to do it. And that opens up all the other questions about, well, what does that mean? What was accessed? You know, was the data that was accessed subject to regulatory concerns? And one of the overriding questions you'll hear from me and Jim throughout this is, was the data encrypted, and what does that mean? And there's some really interesting discussion around data breaches, ransomware, and data encryption. So Jim and I will look at this in two different but related ways. When we're talking about, a data breach, we're going to look at it from a privacy regulatory point of view. And the two big ones out there are the CCPA and the GDPR. And there's some...
Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
Hey, Bill, it's good to be speaking with you today. I just wanted to not gloss over, for some of the folks in the audience, we may not be so familiar with these acronyms. So just as a level set, when we're speaking about CCPA, we're referring, of course, to the privacy law that's newly minted in California. And when we speak about GDPR, this is the privacy regulations or directives that are a few years old now from the European Union. They are not the only ones, of course, but they are probably, Bill, I would say the largest that impact most of the businesses that were
yeah, the most well known, that's for sure.
Yeah, and Bill, for the webinars we've doing together, I've been looking forward to this one probably the most, and not because ransomware is a new phenomenon, but its pervasiveness and the costs are skyrocketing, so that makes it very topical. So with that said, take over.
Yeah, with an interesting point. Today is the first day of the CCPA, enforcement. It actually came into being on January 1st, but the Attorney General of California said we're going to give everybody a 6-month kind of grace period. So July 1st today is the first day that the AG in California will start looking at potential issues. And just as a self-plug, I do have a blog up on our website talking about this as well, especially about the CCPA and it being the first day of enforcement. So if you get a chance, go up and take a look. But the CCPA, as Jim said, is one of the major privacy laws. And I won't go into what it means and all this other kind of stuff. I'm sure everybody's been beaten over the head with it several times. But, data breaches have become a major priority for everyone, both for small as well as large organizations, because of these new privacy laws and the potential fines and penalties that companies can now face. The liabilities are just getting very large now. So under the CCPA, as it's written, it may be possible to, have statutory damages imposed without proof of actual damages. We are, in my blogs, I refer to that as presumed damages. And I know, Jim, we've talked about that as well.
Yeah.
It's likely that such a result would be subject to court challenges, but what that means, well, Jim, I'll let you explain what presumed damages means.
So presumed damages is something that, because the breach occurred, there must have been a damage to all of the accounts that were hacked. In other words, if a hacker accessed information but never did anything with it, most cases, including GDPR, that doesn't rise to a level of a claim. But with California's Act, it presumed damages, meaning if someone's account was hacked, then they have a right to make a claim, everyone who made a claim. When we talk about the numbers, Bill, I'm not certain of the exact number, but I think it was over 100,000 accounts in the target breach. So every one of them that involved the California consumer, every one of those people now had a financial claim regardless of whether those hackers did anything with it. That's roughly what presumed damages means.
Well, and you had touched on it there as well. The CCPA also includes the private right of action, which is different from the GDPR, meaning that data subjects can actually file suit against the company who is breached, instead of, for example, like the GDPR. That's not necessarily built into it. It's all controlled by the regulatory authority. But California included the private right of action to say, well, gee, yeah, if Bill Tolson information was breached, I don't have to wait for the AG in a class action suit or anything like that. I can go after the company myself. Right, Jim?
Yes, and since breaches happen probably every 30 seconds or so, and today being the first day of enforcement, I'm interested to find out how many people filed their private causes of action today, and I'll check that out tomorrow, Bill.
Yeah, and one more point before I move on. You'll see on bullet number 2, the personal information must be non-encrypted and non-redacted. That will be a key discussion point as we get further on, but I just wanted to point that out, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Data breach with the GDPR, it spells it out a bit differently, but both the GDPR and CCPA trigger the process of notification, meaning, boy, company ABC was breached. The company can't tell yet what was done, who was potentially accessed, whether data was copied, that kind of stuff. But the fact that they were breached means that they got to start the notification notice of sending out correspondence to every single person that could have been breached, that their data may have been breached, and all the other stuff that we've all run across. Company might say, well, gee, we're going to give you a year's worth of credit monitoring, all this kind of stuff. But just the mere fact that the breach occurred starts to trigger those things, those actions, and they're costly actions. Now, and the reason why I talked about those other things in CCPA, the GDPR does not specifically include a private right of action. In the EU, the whole litigation process is thought of differently, and I've read the GDPR several times. And Jim, I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but I'm not sure an individual data subject can bring a lawsuit under the GDPR.
I don't believe under the GDPR, but what's important to note about that is that GDPR is a directive or a framework, but each of the couple of dozen members of the EU have their own set of data privacy laws that are under the auspices of the GDPR. So,
yeah, and they have their own.
May or may not have individual causes of action by country.
Yeah, each country has their own data privacy agency. All kind of under the umbrella of the GDPR authority. But yeah, there are 29 different agencies, and like you say, from country to country, the capabilities might change. But generally speaking, under the GDPR as it's written, presumed damages are not included specifically, but the private right of action also is not. So, we've already touched on some of these things. What are some of the consequences around, a data breach? And like I said a minute ago, one of the bigger costs is the cost of customer notification, and that's not cheap. In a medium-sized company, I've seen costs of $3.5, $4.5, $500, or $5 million just to notify everybody who could have been included in the breach. So you immediately start off with some major costs, and then you get into things like, obviously this is going to get out because you're sending all these notifications out. What's that going to mean for customer satisfaction? Is your customer service support hotlines going to get mobbed? And that for those of us who've been in that business, that's very costly. Every time a customer support person picks up a phone call, that's expensive. And then are you going to offer credit monitoring? Are you going to start offering incentives to key customers, or even restitution without going to court? All of these things start to add up, and then you get to damage to the brand or the company reputation, and that's a real thing. We've talked about before in some of these cases where there were very big ransomware attacks and things like this. The CEO was eventually fired. Various other people lost their jobs. The value of shareholder shares, went down a great deal. So shareholder equity suffered. And then you start looking at potential regulatory fines and penalties. For GDPR and CCPA, they can be massive. And then you get into class action lawsuits, the individual lawsuits for individual right and then almost always investor lawsuits as well, because the shares take such a hit. So that's an issue. And then here's some interesting facts that just to kind of level set here. Half of organizations were hit by ransomware last year, or approximately half. So it's not an unknown kind of thing.
Yeah, Bill, we had a discussion when we were prepping here. I had to go check that again just to make sure. That's a remarkable figure.
Yeah, it's you could be sitting there and either you don't know or you do know your company wasn't hit, but that's a really telling statistic. It doesn't mean in every single case a ransom was paid or the encryption didn't get decrypted, all those kinds of things. We'll get into those numbers a little bit later, but I just said the CEO was fired in a couple of cases. 40% of the consumers hold the CEO personally responsible, which obviously in the next shareholders meeting for public companies is usually not a good thing. And then and this will get into what we talk about a little bit later, but the most successful ransomware attacks include attacking data in a public cloud. And as I sort of mentioned before, most companies are in a digital transformation strategy, and the idea is to move some or all of their data center capabilities up into the cloud and drop the cost of the data center. Not everybody will do that, but the ransomware people now obviously see this trend, so they're attacking cloud-based systems and storage as well. So what are the costs of breaches? And we have some interesting numbers here, and these are ones that Jim and I just collected here, and they're all very recent. The chance of experiencing a data breach within the next 2 years is almost 30% for companies. Ransomware attacks have increased 200% globally, which sort of makes sense to me if half of all half of all companies to this point have experienced a breach. And then the actual cost, infections cost businesses more than $8 billion in 2018. And that's projected to grow from 2018 to 2021 to $20 billion. So it's obviously a thriving business, and I think in one of the other slides I eventually get to, ransomware obviously pays off. So we just need to be aware of that. So here's some more numbers that Jim had also found as well. But they're telling. The average worldwide cost of a ransomware attack last year was $3.92 million. But in the United States, the average cost was $8.19 million. So it's
remarkable, isn't it? That it's more than double in the U.S. And from that IBM report, I think the sector that had the highest average was healthcare. I think they came in at $6.45 million per breach. And what I thought, it's not on the slide here, but what I thought was very interesting in that IBM report, Bill, was that the time to contain a breach, the average was 279 days. You would expect that breaches would be identified and addressed much earlier. It's not true. The average was 279. And how many accounts and records are accumulated during that time of containment, I think the average size of a data breach involved over 25,000 records with a cost per record of about $150.
Exactly, yeah.
So that's why it gets up to these numbers. But like you said earlier, that's only the quantifiable numbers. There's other lawsuits and fees and defense costs that aren't included in this.
Yeah, that lag, that latency in when a breach occurs versus when a company notices, can be hundreds of days. I think in the Target one, it was almost a year. It was a long period of time before Target even recognized that a breach had occurred. I mean, these hackers are creating this code that, you know, obviously is very well done. You know, I'm not complimenting them, but I mean, they know exactly what they're doing, and they know how to program. So, you know, they're trying to make this stuff as invisible as possible. And one of the strategies I'll get into later is that a lot of ransomware now is basically held, you know, before it's triggered for long periods of time. And I'll explain why later. There's a very good reason why. But also that plays into this idea of, you know, it taking, you know, 3, 6, 9 months for a company to actually recognize they've been breached and then start sending out breach notices. So yeah, it's a little scary, because in those, for example, 9 months, what's been happening with your data? You know, did it show up on the dark web? Has it been sold? Are people using it? All that kind of stuff. As we said in the third bullet, you know, almost 50% of businesses have been affected. But some interesting statistics here. Paying the ransom doubles the cost of dealing with the ransomware attack. But as you'll see in another slide, most companies actually do pay the fine, and there's some reasons for that. You know, paying the ransom or this doubling of the cost doesn't really include fines and penalties from regulatory laws associated with what we're going to get into, and this is the two-stage ransomware attacks, and that can massively raise the overall average cost of a ransomware attack. And not really sure why we have that last bullet there that repeats the third one, but maybe to make a point.
We're reinforcing the idea that it.
Yeah, well, reinforcing it. Yeah. So what is ransomware? You know, it's a form of malware that is built around getting into an enterprise. And by the way, this happens to individuals at home as well too. But we're just focusing on the enterprise here. But it gets into the enterprise in one of several ways, and I'll explain that in a minute. But then once it's triggered, it starts to encrypt, or it encrypts data throughout the enterprise, and it might be just targeted servers, or it could be the whole enterprise. But they go through and encrypt it all, and basically you receive a little pop-up message that says, hey, we have control of your data now. The only way to get your encryption keys back to actually make your data usable again is to, you know, pay us 100 grand in Bitcoin, for example. Basically that it leaves you with the choice of, do I pay and get access to my data again, or do I not pay and have to basically build a system from scratch? And that is very expensive. And we'll show you, so we'll talk about some examples here in a minute, but that's ransomware. So that gets into the question of, you know, should you pay the ransom? And some of the examples we'll get into, actually most of the examples that you read about is where the company that was being ransomed didn't pay the ransomware, and all of a sudden they're incurring all these interesting costs. You know, but if you pay the ransom, will the hacker follow through? Will they give you the encryption keys so you can make your data usable? And then, Jim, is paying a ransom even legal?
This is an interesting question. I mean, we'll talk about an example later on where negotiating with these folks is akin to negotiating with terrorists and actually violates some laws, including U.S. law. Also, municipal or city situations that are bound by certain procurement rules don't allow you to pay the ransom in a, you know, an upfront manner.
Yeah, especially for you know, government-related agencies and stuff like that. I mean, I was looking through some of the legal journals, and that was one of the questions, and they said, by and large, paying ransom is legal. It's not illegal. Now, how you pay the ransom, you get in some kind of interesting things you got to tiptoe around, but actually paying a ransom is in many places, in most places, is not considered illegal. And that first bullet, will the hacker follow through with giving you the encryption keys? The common sense answer, and actually the true answer, is yes, they will, because if they get to be known for demanding a ransom and then not giving your encryption keys back even though you paid, who in the future would ever pay the ransom? I mean, gee, they're not going to give me the keys back anyway, so no. So they have a very high percentage of actually paying, of actually giving the encryption keys back. I'm not saying this is the way to go, but it's an interesting statistic. That's how these guys make money. And if they weren't following through, who would be paying the ransom? And another follow-up interesting statistic, in the U.S., 25% of organizations actually paid the ransomware, so 75% didn't. I think it was 99% of that 25% got their encryption keys back and they went on.
Yeah, and just a quick caveat, the reporting here is not a precise science given the nature of what's going on here.
Yeah.
There's biases in disclosures and reporting, so this is the best scientific estimates that have been provided in these reports.
Yeah, a lot of companies don't like to put a press release out on their ransomware woes and whether they paid or not, and how much, and public companies obviously have to report that kind of stuff, but like Jim said, we don't necessarily get all of the data. But I think this is a pretty good representation, and based on what I was saying, 95% of organizations that paid ransom had their data restored. They got the encryption keys back. Only 1% didn't, after they paid, didn't get the encryption keys back.
A bit of honor among thieves, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, honor among the thieves, and recognizing that to get paid the next time, they gotta act in, I hate to say this, but they gotta act in good faith. It's kind of counterintuitive to the whole act of ransomware, but yeah. Yes. So what are some of the ways that ransomware, gets in? And, very, very straightforward stuff. Most of you have heard this, but, via the remote desktop protocol, a lot of it happens with email phishing. An employee will click on an email and maybe even an attachment, and then all of a sudden they're infected. I mean, that's happened a lot in some famous cases, one of them being a political case. Software vulnerabilities, the privilege escalation attacks that they're called. I think in the Capital One AWS privilege escalation attack, several of the servers that were under the control of Capital One, but up in the AWS cloud, server patches in the VMs were not updated, and that kind of left a back door for the perpetrator to get in and start raising their privileges and things like that. And then,
I remember that Capital One breach built by an ex-AWS employee, Paige Thompson. She actually they had no idea this occurred for several months until she started revealing herself in social media posts about, how she was able to do this, seemingly wanting to get caught.
Yeah, I think she was trying to sell some of the PII as well. But yeah, no, it looked like she was being so kind of erratic that it did look like she either didn't think she could be caught no matter what, or was trying to be caught. And then the obvious one here too as well, infected file downloads. Be careful of what you download and only go to secure sites, all that kind of neat stuff. But these are the ways that this stuff gets in. And then once it's in, it really starts propagating. So for just some background, and we bring these up just because they're interesting. But here is some standard ransomware attack examples. The first one occurred in 1989. It was the first one that anybody can track. And it was a really interesting one where this Dr. Joseph Pop, who is an AIDS researcher, kicked off the first ransomware attack by distributing 20,000 floppy disks at the World Health Organization International AIDS Conference.
We're going to have to stop there, Bill, and half of the attendees may not even know what a floppy disk looks like anymore.
Yeah, I remember the 8-inch floppy disk, which is really sad. But in this ransomware attack, he demanded $567 from each diskette recipient. So while he was at this conference, he just started, laying out, disks and chairs and all these kinds of things. And where the 567 specific dollars came from, I don't think anybody has ever figured that one out, but this was the first recorded case.
So you just left them there, and then people would dutifully go back from the conference and put them in their computer and infect their system.
Back in '89, I remember in '89, I was working on personal computers and stuff, and viruses didn't exist, ransomware didn't exist. So if you had a 5.25-inch floppy disk sitting on a chair with a nice little label on it, who wouldn't run back to their computer and plug it in and see what was on it. I don't necessarily, obviously this was ingenious, criminal as heck, but, you got to wonder where the guy got the idea. And then Jim, you had some thoughts around the Honda.
This was a unique attack, not unique, but this was an interesting attack because the ransomware actually took their online systems, their assembly line systems off, and started monkeying around with how vehicles were being built. The ransomware was not disclosed, but it was a very serious attack that may have some lasting effects because it took so long to recognize how many vehicles were affected by it. We don't know.
Well, how long the lines were shut down after they found it out? Can buyers of Hondas in the future, sue Honda later saying, hey, gee, we have some problems with our car. It may be due to this ransomware attack you suffered. Gee, buy my car back or upgrade me, all these kinds of, it opens up a bunch of litigation issues down the line. One of the more famous ransomware attacks was in the city of Atlanta. This was not too long ago. I think 4, 5, 6 years ago. Maybe, but they got attacked with ransomware. Many of their customer-facing systems were encrypted, and they received a pop-up ransomware note that basically asked for $51,000. The mayor rejected it, did not pay it, and for the city of Atlanta, the estimate was they ended up spending $17 million to make things right. So, an interesting choice there, and then. Similarly, in Boston, they rejected a $76,000 ransomware, a ransom, and looks like they're going to spend about $18 million. So,
I think that was purposeful. You saying Boston instead of Baltimore?
Oh my gosh!
The reason
I enjoy Boston.
Well, the discussion before our webinar today was how pervasive it is in cities and municipalities. Louisiana had a city recently and several other cities, but also very small municipalities are hit with this because they tend to have not state-of-the-art security apparatus. And this is becoming a very lucrative business for these hackers.
The problems with attacking small municipalities is they tend to have small amounts of money too.
Yeah, but how small these demands are.
Yes. Well, I think I've read a bunch about this, and I think that the attackers, kind of understand in some, not all cases, but in some cases, what they can get without them refusing. I mean, if they ask for $1 billion, the city of Atlanta's, obviously going to say we can't afford that. Or even a much smaller city. So I think they try to figure out what they could pay, and then ask for it, and then they go on to the next city and do it there. But the Evil Corp,
This is
Jim?
my favorite by far.
Yeah.
Well, not only, but because it's a developing situation right now. A few weeks ago, DOJ the Department of Justice had issued an indictment for these guys. It's a Russian hacker group, but their MO is that they target only U.S. Fortune 500 companies, government infrastructure, including elections, a major news outlet, and it's a sophisticated process that simply identifies employees of the target organization, disables their antivirus, and then waits for that employee to go on a public site when they're taking a break and going surfing on the web. And when they go on these public sites, the malware is installed, and it sits and wait until the employee logs back on to the customer VPN. And that's how they get in. These guys are sophisticated, they're very organized, and this is probably the #1 threat facing U.S. businesses, particular enterprise-sized businesses right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really sophisticated one. So why don't backups solve the issue? And one of the things I mentioned earlier on is that in a lot of this ransomware, they are delayed, meaning you get infected and then you know or the ransomware doesn't go out and start encrypting stuff for a period of time, maybe a week, maybe 3 months, whatever. And that means during that time that you've been infected with the ransomware, but it's not obvious, you're backing up all of that stuff. And that ransomware is on the backup tapes as well. So if you restore a backup tape, you're restoring an infected backup. So that's why they delay the triggering of the ransomware to get the majority of the backup tapes infected. Could you go back a year maybe? But what good is a server with year-old data on it going to give anybody? So usually these are triggered after 90 days, maybe at the most 6 months, but it really basically means your backups are worthless then. But backup tapes still are needed, and one of the reasons is it's referred to as air gaps, because an actual tape can be removed from a tape drive. It can't be infected. And in many cases, the ransomware, for example, if you're doing backups to disk, for example, maybe on your NAS or whatever it happens to be, or even in your cloud, the ransomware can infect those backups because they can get right to them. With a tape or with immutable storage, you have what amounts to as an air gap, a physical limitation to where it can't be infected. So we'll talk about that a little bit later here. But that delay really does make it almost impossible to recover. So that's why 25% or so actually ends up paying the ransom. There is a new thing that has shown up in the last couple of years, and that is ransomware as a service, meaning these ransomware kits have been put up for sale on the dark net or the dark web, so that others can download them and try their hand at ransomware as well. And this is a phenomenon that has been showing up. An interesting stat: CryptoWall, which is one of the better-known ransomware apps, and was sold via ransomware as a service, has generated $320 million in ransom slash revenue since it was created. So this stuff is not nickel and dime, that's for sure, especially for the hackers that are putting the ransomware up for sale.
Bill, but just by interest, this was very interesting to me. Exactly how much is CryptoWall charging for its little criminal kit?
That I could not find out. I'm not a member of the dark net, so I've never seen it. But actually, it's a good question, and I did some research, and I could not find out.
Yeah, I did the same thing and couldn't find out as well. I guess you really have to get deep into it before the cost.
You got to be a card-carrying member to know that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's great.
So what is two-stage ransomware? This is This is the newest ransomware that's been out. It's been out, I think, for 2 years. Here's an interesting headline, a recent headline: ransomware attacks to morph into two-stage extortion campaigns. So two-stage ransomware obviously is a version of ransomware. And not only does it encrypt the system data, but it also, before it encrypts it, it copies all of the target data back to the hacker's computers or servers. And then once copied, all of the enterprise data is encrypted. And the hacker also has copies of the unencrypted data on their servers. The target basically gets the ransomware note, popping up, basically saying, pay us, whatever in Bitcoin. Otherwise, you're not going to get the encryption keys back. And oh, by the way, if you don't pay us, we're going to start releasing this unencrypted data on the internet. Now, the problem is a lot of that data is going to include PII, personal information. And that starts to really raise the liability of cost. It's not just the cost of notification for a breach or all the other stuff we've already talked about, but what does the release of either corporate IP and or PII mean? That can be, and we'll get into this here in another slide or two, but that can be just hugely damaging, both in money and reputation. And like the older ransomware, this stuff is not triggered until sometime in the future on the two-stage ransomware to make sure that the backup tapes are affected as well. I ran across one example where one form of this didn't trigger until the infected computer was booted up 90 times. So that obviously that would be 90 days in the future or somewhere around there.
So Bill, the two-stage you're referring to, this is the first stage is
the first stage is the actual encryption of the data in the enterprise, and then the second stage is the copying of all of the information so that they can use it against you later. And that just started.
Yeah. Now, if I recall, that two-stage ransomware was very successfully done recently with a very large New York, Los Angeles celebrity law firm. The Grubman Shire firm, if I recall, they had clients such as Bruce Springsteen, Madonna, Nicki Minaj, and they had a two-stage attack. And from what I recall, the demand was something like $21 million not to release all of their high-profile clients' records.
Yeah.
Of course, they hired a cyber firm. In response, the hackers leaked a little bit of Lady Gaga's record.
A sample, yeah.
Yeah, and then the demand went up to $42 million, but remarkably, it then vanished from the news. Rolling Stone had a large article on this, and then I think you can't find anything after first week of June.
Yeah.
So, it's speculation at this point how that was resolved, but that was a two-stage that was threatened and leaked into the web.
Yeah. There's no shortage of good examples. So how does this stuff work? Very quickly, and it's just like I just explained to you. I mean, the ransomware is, for example, brought in by an email phishing attack. It gets moved across potentially the enterprise and the cloud. It waits for a period of time so you can infect the backup tapes. Then it's triggered, basically copying the data down into the hackers' servers, and then all the data is encrypted. You get the ransomware notice, and if you pay it, you get the encryption key, and if you don't pay it, basically the data starts being distributed on the web itself. So what are the dangers of two-stage ransomware? And you'll remember that we started off by talking about the definitions of breach for the CCPA and the GDPR, and what that means. In this case, with the second stage, data, including PII, is copied, so the hacker has it. Also, obviously, some or all of the enterprise data is encrypted, making it unusable. If the ransom isn't paid, then you don't get the key back, but also you start seeing your data show up in the internet. In fact, there's one case going on right now where the company had terabytes of information. Wasn't terabytes, a terabyte or two of information copied, and the cyber hackers are releasing 2 gigabytes at a time on the internet. So this is going to go on a while, and each time the cost of stopping it goes up, the cost of the ransom goes up. But also your sensitive data is released, and what does that mean for CCPA and GDPR? Well, you have breach notification requirements, but if data is actually leaked, PII is actually leaked, then you're looking at potentially much larger fines, potentially up to 20 million euros for the GDPR. So I could foresee in the near future, hackers basically saying, and oh, by the way, we got all your data and we're going to start releasing it. And we're going to send an anonymous message to the GDPR authority telling them we're releasing it, and this is the company we got it from. So that could be part of the ransom. Would you rather pay 100 grand in Bitcoin or be gone after by the GDPR or the CCPA and end up paying, for example, 20 million euros versus 100 grand? The liabilities are much bigger here. So here's some two-stage ransomware examples that just in the last 6 months have happened. The city of Pensacola is an interesting one. This is the one actually where the 2 gigabytes at a time of the data is being released to the internet because the city didn't pay the $1 million. Another one, Allied Universal, didn't pay their $2.3 million ransom, so that one's currently going on. And then the Cognizant Maze attack, which is a version of this two-stage ransomware. The company didn't pay. They say they contained the attack, but they think the cost of containment is going to be in the $70 million range. Obviously, that would be a tough decision by the board of directors to make. That's for sure. So what are some of the best practices? As I know we're running out of little time here and we need time for questions. So some of the best practices, and they're simple common sense stuff to begin with. Train employees, especially not to respond to unknown emails, a phishing attack. You don't want to be clicking on emails or even email attachments because that's how a lot of these things get infected. Pretty straightforward, but it goes against human nature. You get an email from the IRS saying, we're going to sue you or something like that. Of course, you're gonna open it. At least a lot of people are going to do it. So it's tough to do. You want to employ the best of breed security and access controls. I mean, that's just every company needs to do that, whether it's on-prem stuff or whether it's based in the cloud. You got to have that security around it. But if somebody sends one of your employees a phishing email, boy, in a lot of cases, even the best security is not going to pick up on that. Talked about this, use offline air gap backups. Basically, a backup tape is an air gap. It means it's not physically connected to the system. But use them when possible, or removable media of any type, but most people don't do that now. It's either backup tapes or it's disk backups. Disk backups are dangerous in ransomware because those disk-based backups can be infected. Whereas a backup tape sitting in a box somewhere, won't be. But you have that other problem of it being infected over time as you recycle it to do backups and stuff like that. Or you can use immutable worm cloud storage for backups, and that immutability or worm acts as an air gap. And I wrote a blog on that a year or two ago. But immutable storage is now available in all the big clouds, including Microsoft Azure. This I thought was really interesting. The FBI is recommending that companies should consider proactively creating dummy data caches. I'm not sure how you would do that. You probably can go out and buy one, but then the Murphy's Law would say the dummy data cache you bought is already infected with ransomware, so that would be an issue. But also, and this is really the most commonsensical and important piece of all of this, you want to encrypt your data and your backups before you move it, for example, to the cloud.
That's the one I've been waiting for, Bill.
Yeah, I mean, gee, you move it up into a SaaS cloud, and the SaaS vendor, uses their own keys to encrypt it, and they, use common keys and all of this kinds of stuff, and you don't know what kind of security they have. Most companies now, especially large companies in regulated industries, are insisting on this for security's sake. We're not going to touch a cloud. We're not going to put our sensitive data up into the cloud unless we encrypt it before it moves up into the cloud, and we keep the encryption keys, not the cloud provider.
That's it, Bill. The customer themselves are exclusive control of their encryption keys. The ISPs do not have them, which makes it important, because if a ISP is subject to an internal hack from an employee, or has a subpoena issued to it that requires it to disclose customer data, by field encrypting your data before it moves, you're immune from those things.
Yes, and oh, by the way, this is an interesting piece on the GDPR or the CCPA, and probably other privacy regulations. If you encrypt your data, and then later your system, your cloud is breached, for the CCPA, it spells it out pretty, in black and white, that if encrypted data was breached, then the breach didn't occur if the encryption keys were not available. Meaning an encrypted file up in the cloud by itself, even if somebody has access to that encrypted file, they can't open it. Therefore, it doesn't trigger the requirement for notification. It doesn't, allow, others to sue because your data was misused. The simple act of encrypting before you move the data up into the cloud, both regulatorily as well as in some legal situations, means that the data was not accessed because it could not have been accessed. So this is the big deal here. I mean, simply encrypt your data. This is pretty obvious. This is what we're talking about here. Pretty straightforward. But what we're talking about is a security gateway, and one of the problems has been, well, gee, I can't manage my data if I encrypt it first and move it up into the cloud. All it is a bunch of encrypted data that my system couldn't open or manage or do anything with. And now we've, Archive 360, have gone beyond that, and we're using a technology called homomorphic encryption, and that is a special type of encryption that we can encrypt data automatically on site before it moves up into the cloud, and still manage it up in the cloud based off of indexing and keywords and policies and all the things you'd normally expect, but it's still encrypted. So if anybody accesses it, it's absolutely useless, but it's fully manageable. And the encryption keys are kept on site. They're not moved to the cloud. Nobody else has them. Nobody else has access to them. And oh, by the way, this kind of setup should lower your crypto, your hacker's insurance, because you've taken these additional steps. And hacking insurance, crypto insurance, is expensive. That's for darn sure. So in summary, some of the stuff is pretty obvious, but I'll restate it. Data privacy and protection regulations are widespread, and new ones are popping up, every day. The number of ransomware attacks are accelerating. I mean, it's amazing. Just in the 6 months I've been following this, I'm starting to see 5 or 10 of them a day now talked about. Breach notification, that's the initial trigger of if your system was accessed by somebody who's unauthorized, your breach notification is triggered, except when you're, if you're looking at having encrypted the data beforehand. Data encryption and effective key management, like I just said, can reduce your liability, but also protect against that second stage of ransomware, where they're releasing data to the internet to basically threaten you with privacy regulations. If the data is encrypted, they can't release it. So at least that part of the ransomware attack is taken off the table. Always you want to check with your chief legal, with your legal counsel or GC to determine what the state laws around, breach definition is. I once had a lawyer, a GC tell me, always get a written opinion from your corporate lawyer because that's your personal insurance. It just, takes the spotlight off you if something goes bad. And make sure your cyber insurance covers the ransomware costs. Some do and some don't. Jim, you got any closing before we turn it over for questions?
No, I don't. Actually, I'm interested in some of the questions I've been seeing coming across that were posted. So let's get to them.
All right. I know we only got about 3 minutes left here, right. Sharon. I apologize.
We are only going to have a time for 1 or 2. Has a 2-stage ransomware attack triggered a CCPA GDPR regulatory investigation yet?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I have not seen any research or stories. I mean, I not too long ago, a month or 2 ago, I wrote an article on the subject for the Cybersecurity Tech Accord group, an international, group, and I suggested this, and we all kind of worried that, well, by publishing this, are we going to give ransomware, hackers an idea of to do this, and the reply from the group, and it's an international group, was they're going to figure it out anyway. It's best to warn people ahead of time. So to date, I don't think so, but it's a relatively new concept. So I think it's going to show up, but no, not at this point.
Okay, I have time for, I think, 1 more. Could a backup tape that includes the ransomware be restored and thereby restart the countdown clock, providing additional time to fix the issue?
Wow, it would be interesting to get feedback from others on this, but I remember kind of talking around this subject 6, 7, 8 months ago, and I think the answer is maybe, but for example, if you're infected with ransomware and then you restore all the systems back with a week-old tape that actually has the ransomware infection on it, would it restart the 90-day clock, for example? Potentially, but a lot of the ransomware, at least in some cases, goes off the system clock or the computer clock. So unless you went through and changed the time and date on all of your computers throughout the company, I think in many cases it wouldn't help, but I think there's probably a number of times where it would. It'd be interesting to get comments back from people. As you can see, our contact info here, but so if somebody knows more about that, that would be information. That would be really interesting.
All right, so we are going to have to wrap up today. Sorry that we didn't get to everyone's questions, but if this does conclude our webinar for today, so thank you both Jim and Bill. If you have questions we did not address today, we will reach out to you individually. Additionally, if you have questions after the conclusion of this webinar, you can send them to info@archive360.com. A link to the recording and the slides will be sent out to all attendees of this webinar within the next day, and we will also post them to our website. Please stay connected to us as we will have more informative webinars like this one throughout the year. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar and wish everyone a great day.